Hello Year 10, welcome to a new week of science, and I thought I would start this week in front of camera and go through the start this way. It allow you to see me, and it would also mean that it would be a little bit quicker for the video. You can get the starter done, I can introduce the lesson, and we'll go back to the regular way of doing it. So as ever, first 6 questions, first one of which is, what component of the blood is responsible for the immune system? So thinking back to a couple of weeks ago, what component is it, which bit of the blood is responsible for your overall immune system? Good. So then 2, what does the body produce to counter the toxins released by pathogens? 3, what is meant by a communicable disease? 4, state the equation for gravitational potential energy, so thinking back to the bit of physics that we did. 5, what are the units for power? And finally 6, define a hormone for yourself. Good. So we'll go through the answers to those questions. The first one, white blood cells are the bit of the immune system that is responsible for producing all those responses to pathogens, producing all those responses to any diseases within you. Your body releases antitoxins to fight the toxins released by those pathogens. Communicable diseases are simply any disease that can be spread. Okay. Gravitational potential energy is equal to the mass times the height times the gravitational field strength, which on Earth is 10 newtons per kilogram. The equation, the units for power are watts, and hormones are defined as chemical messages. Good. So today we're going to look at medicines, and we're going to look at some existing medicines, but the focus is going to be on how we go about getting new medicines, how we go about developing them, and what the stages are of developing a new medicine. So all very relevant to us at the moment, generally quite interesting, and it's fairly common sense, self-explanatory things that we should be somewhat familiar with already. Okay, so we just need to define medicines, know how the ones that are existing, how they work, look at the stages of developing a new medicine, and then we'll finally look at this idea of double-blind trials and how they work. Great. So I'll go back over to the presentation as normal now and talk you over some slides. So we're going to look at some existing medicines, some treatments that we'll have all taken before, and a little bit about how they work. So think about when you're ill, when you go to the doctors, the different medicines that you can be prescribed, or the different things that you take or use without needing to go to the doctors. And there are 3 types that we need to know about for your GCSE. We need to know about antibiotics, antivirals, and antiseptics. So we're just going to have a little bit of information, a little bit of knowledge about each one of these 3. Okay, so we'll fill in this table. I'll talk you through this table. So first medicine is antivirals, and the clue is in the name. What's it for? It's used to treat viral infections. Okay, and if you think back to what we know about viruses, because they live in cells and then they burst out and they're very, very small and they sort of use our own biology against us, antivirals are quite hard to develop, and it's why to treat the coronavirus they're looking at lots of existing medicines at the moment rather than trying to develop new ones. It takes a little bit of time and it's quite difficult to do. Okay, they suppress, how they work is they suppress the virus from multiplying. So it doesn't actually kill that virus, it just stops it breeding, stops there producing more of it, and so eventually that does kill it. And if you have a viral disease like HIV, you have to take antivirals multiple times a day for the rest of your life in order to stop that virus multiplying, to stop it getting to that point to kill you. Okay, so antivirals stop viruses multiplying, they only work against viruses. Whereas antibiotics, they destroy bacterial infections. And antibiotics have been around for a very, very long time, and lots are naturally occurring. So some of you might have heard of penicillin. It's one of our first antibiotics, and it grows on the mold on bread, and it was discovered because a scientist noticed that if you added the mold from bread to bacteria, it stopped that bacteria growing, and in fact it killed it. That this mold basically killed bacteria. Okay, and so you can harvest that, turn it into penicillin, and then you can take penicillin when you've got bacterial infections. Lots and lots of people are allergic to penicillin, and so we've developed lots of other antibiotics along the time. And it's just a chemical. It works by attacking that bacteria in much the same way that your antibodies do and your phagocytes do. So it's kind of like boosting your natural immunity. And we will all have been on antibiotics at some point in our life, and we will look in a couple of lessons time about antibiotic resistance and things to do with that. So we'll come back and spend a bit more time on antibiotics in a couple of lessons time. Then finally, antiseptics. These are much more general. Antibiotics only against bacteria, antivirals only against viruses. Antiseptics will kill all microorganisms and stops them growing. And these work slightly differently in that they're outside of the body. So Dettol or Domestos or bleach, they are all antiseptics, and you could use those to kill bacteria. Alcohol is also a really good antiseptic. Antiseptic wipes have alcohol in them, which will kill any bacteria. And we'll look a bit more at uses of alcohol and killing bacteria in our next lesson. Really common question around these different types of medicine is it will give you an example of a disease, of a pathogen, like for example coronavirus, and it will say why wouldn't a doctor prescribe antibiotics for the coronavirus? And it's because antibiotics only work against bacterial infections. And as you get older and you go to the doctor and you describe your symptoms, sometimes they'll say, well, I'm not going to give you antibiotics because I think it's viral. It's quite hard to diagnose between the two, but because we use a few too many antibiotics, increasingly doctors are reluctant to give them to you. Okay, so that information is just some stuff that you need to know. What we're going to go on to and look at is looking at how we develop those new medicines and the stages through which medicine needs to go through in order to be developed. Okay, and what's worth knowing about this is that medicines are huge money. So if you look at some of these examples here, statins sold $40 billion worth of this one drug in 2011. This drug here that treats arthritis sold $20 billion worth in 2018, and Viagra, one of the most successful drugs of all time, has sold $2 billion worth every year since it was released. So making drugs, making medicines is big business, and we should be aware of that when we think about these trials, think about what drug companies are interested in these trials, because they're not necessarily doing it for the health of people. They're doing it in order to make money. All these drugs are sort of quality of life drugs. Statins thin the blood. Arthritis is something that older people get that makes their joints hurt. I'll let you all look up what Viagra is used for. They are not life-saving drugs. They are drugs to improve the quality of life for richer countries and therefore richer people. And they'll have all been developed in a similar way. So I'll cross over to pen and paper now, and I'll talk you through the ways that we develop. Okay, so we'll just quickly talk through the different stages that any medicine, any medical treatment, whether that's a medicine or a vaccine, needs to go through before it becomes available to you, before a doctor can prescribe it till you can buy it over the counter. And all medicines start with the first starting step, which is they go through computer trials. Move that down a bit. Computer trials. So that's my attempt at a computer there, showing my age by making it an actual computer rather than a tablet or something. But that's what your first stage of a drug goes through. They make a computer simulation of a person, of a body, and then they run a computer version simulation of the drug against it, and they see whether it works or not. Okay, and drug companies are able to do loads of these at once, so it's not massively accurate, but it means that they can be testing to see whether a medicine is likely to work or not, and they can be doing lots and lots of that at once. And it's just a nice sort of sifting exercise to see what's likely to work and what's not likely to work. If it passes that stage, they will do further testing on human tissues. So stage 2 is human tissues. And this means you get a bit of liver tissue, so a little chunk of liver. You get a little chunk of heart maybe, and you test the drug on it. Okay, and they can see effect on organ or organ systems. And that means if it passes this, great, will it kill liver tissue, will it kill liver cells, or will it kill heart cells? If it passes this stage, it doesn't necessarily mean that it won't have some greater effect on the whole person, on the whole body, but it means that it's looking okay. It passes that stage. Stage 3 is the most controversial stage because it's animal testing. Okay, and all drugs that you take, any medicines that you take, will have passed through animal testing. And we use a couple of animals for this a lot. The main one is these guys here. You see what it is? No? This is a rat. We use rats for lots and lots of animal testing because they have lots of the same organ systems as humans, and they grow quickly, they can be killed quickly, you can get more of them quickly, so they work quite well. But we also use other animals. We've used frogs, we've used dogs, pigs, all those animals across the time. And it's controversial because animal testing really means feeding your rat your medicine, seeing whether it has an adverse effect or not, seeing whether it kills it, and if it doesn't kill it, you kill it anyway, because then you cut it open and you see whether whether there's been any effects inside that you were unaware of. So this is a controversial step because ultimately it's killing animals. But this isn't the same as animal testing for like shampoos, for makeups. It is generally considered that this is for the greater good. It's entirely up to you as to whether you think this is right or not, but when you're weighing up the cost of a few rats versus like a breakthrough medical treatment or a breakthrough cancer treatment or coronavirus treatment, you might well say that it's worthwhile. You could just as equally say that animals are just as worthy of living as us, and so we shouldn't be killing them. Either way, at the moment, for a drug to make it to market in the UK, it has to have passed through 2 mammals before making it to us, so it's not good enough just to test it on some worms or frogs. It needs to be proper animals with multiple organ systems so that they're similar to humans. And then my final stage is the most important one. If it passes through all of that, stage 4 is human trials, which is sometimes called clinical trials. This is where they test it on people, okay, on me and you get paid a few £1,000s to sit and you have your medical trial and you report any side effects, and they'll test to see whether it's worked or hasn't worked. Okay, and there's quite decent money in this because it's reasonable risk. So it is not 100% guaranteed to be safe at this point, but it should be that these other stages have made it so that you're much more likely to be safe and much less likely to have some adverse reactions. But as we'll see in a moment, occasionally you do get those adverse reactions. Okay? So that final stage, human drug trials, it should be that by that point the drug's nice and safe, but you do occasionally hear these stories of people that go for a drug trial and find that they have a massively adverse reaction and they end up very ill, and occasionally you even hear of deaths for it. And it's because there is a risk. Until people and humans actually try that drug, we don't know 100% that it'll be safe, and so unfortunately these things do happen. And this is why drug trials tend to pay quite well. It's like $2-3 grand for a couple of weeks work, because there's this risk to your life. And one aspect of human trials which is really important is to try and rule out the placebo effect. And we might have all experienced the placebo effect at some point in our lives. So if you go to the shop to buy some painkillers, you will find that there is a huge array there at different prices. So ibuprofen, bog standard ibuprofen, costs about 40p for a packet. Nurofen costs about £1.50, and then the more expensive Nurofen, they do ones for period pain or headaches or stomach ache. They do lots of different ones, all cost up to £5. And it might be that you go in and you expect this one, being more money, to work better than this one, and this one to work better than this one. And so because you expect it to work better, you might well find and might be able to say, well, this always works for me, I'm going to buy that. But the truth is, these 3 drugs have the exact same active ingredient in it, the exact same pain-killing ingredient. It's just that they market them differently. They have a fancy box and a brand name, and so you expect it to work better. And so often people say that it does work better. That expectation means that you experience a better result, in much the same way that when you drink Coca-Cola, the proper branded stuff, you are expecting a particular taste and experience, and so generally it's more satisfying than an off-brand equivalent. Okay, the placebo effect is about your expectations for the product or the medicine and how that fares in reality. And if you give people a drug and you tell them that it'll work, they often report that it has worked or that it's relieved their symptoms, particularly with things like period pains or headaches, which are quite subjective anyway and not necessarily that easy to quantify whether they've worked or not. If you stop thinking about a headache, it often goes away, for example. Okay, so in order to rule this out in drug trials, they do a double blind trial where one group takes the drug and one group takes a placebo. These will be 2 pills. One will be the actual drug and one will be just a sugar pill with no ingredients in it at all.
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And they both take this for 2 or 3 weeks or for however long, and then they report back whether it's worked or what side effects it's had or anything else like this. And it should be that people who've been taking the placebo have no results. It does absolutely nothing for them. But of course, sometimes the placebo effect means that they will report that I took this sugar pill, there's nothing for a week, and now I feel better. And that just means that we can rule out the placebo effect when developing a new drug. But it's important when you do this that it's double blind, that the patient doesn't know which drug that they're taking, but also the scientists or doctors that are running that drug trial don't know either, because it's in their interest to make sure that that drug passes that trial and goes to market, because at that point the company will have spent lots and lots of money developing it and they want to make profit, or they're just very hopeful that that drug saves people, whichever you prefer. Either way, doctors can't necessarily be trusted with those results, so they need to be blind to whether it's the placebo or not, so that they can analyse and present those results honestly. And the patient can't know, because else they would alter their reporting of it as well. The only exception to this is with seriously ill students, it says there. That should be patients. Seriously ill patients. A placebo is not normally used. So if you are very ill, they won't. They will just give you the active drug to see whether it works. And this is all about risk versus reward of giving someone an untested, unlicensed drug that hasn't been thoroughly tested. If they are seriously ill, there is less risk to that anyway, as their life is already in danger or their quality of life is already greatly reduced. Whereas if someone reports with a bit of a headache or a bit of a stomach ache, you're not going to take a risk with an unlicensed, unproven drug. Okay, which leads us on to our last question, which is evaluate the use of unlicensed drugs and vaccines during an EVD outbreak. And EVD is Ebola. This is cut from a bigger question which would explain that. Okay, so you just need to go through and talk about this a little bit. And the first thing to say with this question is to show that you know what unlicensed means, that it won't have been fully tested and therefore it won't be fully safe. It's just with these 6-mark questions, make it really clear that you understand what the key words in it means. So an unlicensed medicine will not be tested. It won't be fully safe. And then expand on that. That means it could have dangerous side effects, and you would never ordinarily use an unlicensed drug or an unlicensed medicine. There would be far too great a risk for it. However, EVD, which again, it tells you this in the other part of the question, it has a high fatality rate. It means that lots of people die from it, and therefore once you know someone has it or someone's likely to get it, the risk is great to their health. And that means that there is much more to be gained from having a medicine that can cure that person or save that person. And so the risk to reward ratio or calculation changes slightly, and it might be worth taking some risks. Okay, so lots of patients would die regardless. So if you didn't use that medicine, which yes might cause them harm, there's a great chance that they would die anyway. And so it becomes possibly worth risking using that unlicensed medicine. The coronavirus has a very low fatality rate, it's like 1%, and that means that it's not worth us trialing and risking dangerous medicines and dangerous vaccines because it's unlikely to kill people. So there's no point in telling people to drink bleach or to fire themselves with ultraviolet light, because in general we are safe from it, and there's no point talking about risky treatments. Okay, as such, the risk against the reward is low, and this is what makes this question difficult. It's phrasing this in a way that makes it clear that you understand what's going on. I understand that the risk is fairly low. People are going to die anyway, so we may as well try something to help save them. Okay, and as long as that patient is informed, as long as you're not lying to them and saying this is a miracle cure or it'll absolutely save you, it is okay to potentially take that risk. If you're telling the patient, look, this could be damaging, it could harm you, but I think that there's also a good chance, and unfortunately your symptoms are such that there's every chance you'll die anyway, then it's okay to take that risk. Okay, and the key thing is a vaccine, should it work, could potentially eradicate the disease. So it could save millions and millions of people's lives in this scenario. So it's definitely worth risking it against 1 or 2 people in order to ensure that works. Whereas a medicine might not have such a great effect. So it's weighing up really, could you cure lots of people? Could you save lots of people versus the risk to the 1 or 2 individuals that you're giving it to? And this is like a big question that medicine and science deals with all the time. So it's very tricky for a GCSE question. And these questions like this, you are not necessarily expected to get all the 6 marks. It's about making clear points on those points that you do understand. So don't worry if you look at this and think, crikey, it's a bit difficult. It's meant to be. Just do your best with them. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.